I was missing my clapper for the longest time. I had to try and find it. Which, by the way, I don't know if you guys have noticed this or not, but the beginning of every episode obviously has the clapper. But the information on the clapper is relevant to each episode. So maybe you can look back and take a look at it and see like, oh, I wonder what it said. Marker. Good afternoon. No, it's not afternoon. Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to Cornerstone, the show where we attempt to navigate our culture through a biblical lens. Are we recording? We are recording. I'm your host, Shane Kai. The last two episodes that we've done have been pretty heavy hitters. The last episode was about contraception, and the week before that was about failure. So this week, naturally, we're going to take a step back and do something fun, a little bit more pop culture, a little bit less spiritual. But before we get into that, I need to ask you a question. What was last week's memory verse? Does anybody remember it? If you do, pause the video, say it out loud, say it to your friends. I'm assuming that you've paused the video and recited it for yourself. It was Romans 13:12. The night is far spent and the day is at hand. Therefore, let us cast off the works of darkness and put on the armor of light. So did you remember it or did you forget? Let me know. Now, here's a good question. Do you remember the week before that? The verse that we said. The first verse that we committed to memory. Does anybody remember it? It's okay if you don't. It's Psalm 66, verse 20. Blessed be the Lord, for he has not turned away my prayer, nor his mercy from me. Okay, so everybody here knows what Marvel is. Marvel, the company. When I say the word Marvel, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? Chances are it's the movies or the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Remember, there are other things in Marvel. There's comics, TV shows, video games, novels, memorabilia. There are a lot of things in Marvel that are not related to the MCU. And I think everyone in America has probably seen at least one Marvel movie. And even if you haven't, you at least know what it is. And a lot of people spend time online or in person talking about how much they love Marvel, how much they love the MCU, and they send their highest praise to it, and they just love talking about everything that is good. I myself am a really big Marvel fan, so I have a lot of good things to say about the MCU as well. But I'm not going to lie, it feels like we don't talk negatively enough. I don't think that we bring up criticism very often anymore. Nowadays, online, it seems like anytime you have something negative to say, people are telling you to watch something else. If you don't like it, then why do you watch it? Which is a ridiculous argument. And things like that. So I wanted to take today to list off a bunch of the things that I hate about the MCU. Because as much as I love it, there are things about it that I hate. And I want to put them out there. So I've compiled a list of a few things and we're going to get right into it. Number one, I hate that the MCU has become the default for Marvel fans. Okay, let me explain myself. When I say that I'm a fan of Marvel, like I said a few minutes ago, the first few things you're going to think of are the movies, right? Because the movies have become so popularized. Nowadays, we have so many people who love Marvel, but in reality, when they say they love Marvel, they're just talking about the movies. Which, don't get me wrong, there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, but we often forget how much bigger the larger universe is. There's, like I said, there's comic books, there's TV shows, there's video games, and there's action figures and memorabilia, right? There's all these different things, but it kind of sucks that the MCU has become so popular that people forget that those things even exist. It's just the movies. When people say, I know a lot about Marvel, they're talking about just the movies, just the MCU. And the reason why I bring this up is because a few weeks ago, I decided to rewatch for the first time the cartoon Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes. What I realized really quickly is that there are a bunch of characters in those shows that are not in the movies that I couldn't remember their names. And that kind of bothered me because I used to be such a big fan of the comics too, and the storylines that happen within the comics. You see, what I had was I had this giant book called the Marvel Encyclopedia, which was basically just a comprehensive list of all of the Marvel characters in existence. And back then, I used to study that book more than I studied my Bible. I will self-admit that. So I knew pretty much every character in the Marvel Universe. So when I was a kid, I was watching Earth's Mightiest Heroes. I knew all of these characters. I knew Mandrill. I knew the Grim Reaper. I knew Baron von Strucker. I knew Zax. I knew Radioactive Man. I knew Abomination Man. I knew all of these characters. But when I was rewatching it, somewhere in the far reaches of my mind, I recognized these characters, but I couldn't remember their names. And I'm like, well, who is that guy? I know that guy. How come I can't remember his name? And eventually I did remember their names. It hit me right then and there that the reason why I couldn't remember their names is simply because they aren't in the MCU. And so much of my Marvel knowledge has become the MCU that I forgot everything that wasn't the MCU. And that kind of bothered me because I'm like, there's so many awesome characters and storylines and plot events that happen in the comics and happen in the TV shows and in the video games that I've just completely neglected just because of the 30 or something movies that have come out. And again, the movies aren't bad. In fact, a lot of them are great. But I will say they don't tell stories and character arcs nearly as interestingly as some of the shows and comics do. Like, the movies are kind of a diluted version of the comics. That's just something I noticed. And when I noticed that, I started to, it made me enjoy the show more, but it also made me reflect on the MCU again and go, man, it's really feels like there's not a lot in the MCU, and it really feels not as cool. There were a lot of things in the MCU I was starting to look back on and start to dislike. And that's kind of how I came up with this topic in the first place. It was from rewatching the first season of EMH and realizing there's a bunch of things in the MCU that I don't like. So, number 2, one thing I don't like about the MCU is how often characters, villains specifically, are killed off. It's kind of disappointing to me that there's so many amazing villains that were pulled from the comics and put into the movies, but they were killed off after just like one movie, and they were never used again because they're dead. And it makes sense for some characters because they're purely used as the villain for that movie, and once they use up all of their importance, right, then there's no sense in keeping them alive because they're done. There's nothing else you can do with them. Like Ronan the Accuser. He's just a basic movie villain. There's no emotion to him. There's nothing else you can do with him. So it makes sense that he dies at the end of Guardians 1. And there's a few villains like that in the MCU. But every now and then you find a villain in the MCU that you felt like could have been used more. I think of Baron von Strucker, for sure. I think of Ultron. I think of Claw. I think of Red Skull, but that one's a little bit more iffy because they technically did use him later on. I think of MODOK. Oh, Zemo is another great example. Zemo was never killed off, and he was used later on, but it feels like they're not going to do anything else with him, and that disappoints me. So there are villains that have been used in the past that either were only in one movie and then they were killed off, or they weren't killed, but they're never going to come back. And that's just a real shame to me because I don't think the purpose of a villain is to just be used once and then die. I think that you can use villains multiple times. You just have to be creative enough to figure out how you can defeat them while also bringing them back later on. And I think that the MCU just hasn't taken that step to try to be creative enough to do that. Number 3, I hate the misplaced humor. This is one that's a little bit more popular to talk about. I think a lot of people who love the MCU could mention this, but I don't mind the movies being funny and comedic. I just think that the humor in the MCU films is often misplaced, and it often kills other parts of storytelling just to tell a joke. So in a lot of times you have humor that shows up in places that's weird, like maybe something really sad or dramatic just happened, and then someone tells a joke and it just kind of kills the mood. And then there's other times where Marvel has broken continuity from previously established stories just to tell a new joke. Like that happened in Shang-Chi a lot, where there was previous information that was established in Iron Man 3 and movies like that. And they completely broke continuity and changed things just to tell a new joke. That bothers me. It bothers me that humor is more important than continuity and consistency within stories. I don't really want to get into Phase 4 and Phase 5 specifically because I think there's already enough people on the internet who are complaining about how bad Phase 4 and Phase 5 have been. So I don't really need to do that. One thing I will say, though, is it doesn't make sense to me to continue using the phase model, right? It made sense for the first three because it felt like it was continuously building until Infinity War. So you had Phase 1, Phase 2, and then Phase 3. Or they might be going back to it since Bob Iger is back in place. But when Chavik, or however you say his name, when he was in charge, he was making different creative decisions. And at that point, it didn't really make any sense to call these sections of movies phases because everything was just going in different directions all the time. Nothing felt very articulated, and it didn't feel continuous. It didn't feel like each iteration was building towards a greater story. It just felt like each movie and show was making their own stories in different paths. And so calling that a phase to me just doesn't make much sense because they're not reinforcing each other. You know, even in Phase 5, there's a bunch of stories in Phase 5 that are not continuations of stuff from Phase 4. So Phase 5 has its own separate stories that are separate from Phase 4. So that you have these two phases that are completely different. It just doesn't make much sense to me. I think after Phase 3, they should have just dropped the whole model of phases and just released more movies, you know? And instead of calling them phases, you could just say, okay, this is what we're doing for the next 2 years or whatever, right? This is our release order. Again, it's a very minor nitpick. It's not a big deal. It's just something a little bit smaller that I find weird about Marvel. This is technically a compliment towards Marvel, and it's more something I don't like about the fan base. I don't like the argument that Marvel is formulaic. Okay? I'm not saying it isn't formulaic. I'm just saying I don't like the argument that's presented for that accusation. You know, the accusation is that Marvel just has a formula and they've been overusing that formula to death. I'm not saying that they're wrong. I'm just saying you're not doing a very good job of presenting that argument. Everyone is quick to complain about how formulaic the movies are, but I ask someone, well, what do you think the formula is? Can you give me like an explanation for what the formula is? And I don't really get an answer from that. No one's really able to tell me what the formula is. Everyone knows it's there. Everyone knows that it's been there for a long time and they keep overusing it. But when I ask people to explain what the formula is and like, okay, well, tell me what you think the formula is, no one really gives me an answer. So it's one could say, I doubt that there is a formula in the first place if you can't even tell me what it is. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying someone could say that. Personally, I wouldn't say that Marvel is formulaic. I think that they reuse certain ideas, but I don't think that the entire movies can be explained by one simple formula. Here's an interesting complaint. I am growing tired of after credit scenes. I don't know why. Maybe I'm just getting older, or maybe I've just seen too many of these movies. But these after credit scenes, man, they're getting annoying. They're getting really annoying. I just don't feel nearly as hyped about them anymore. I don't know if it's just the way that they do them, or if it's the fact that they are always doing them and it's not a surprise anymore. That actually might be part of the reason, because it's not a surprise anymore. It's just, oh, you have to stay towards the end because you know that there's going to be an after credit scene. And some of these after credit scenes are just more opportunities to tell more jokes, which I find also partially annoying. Some of these jokes are really good. Like, I think the Captain America one after Homecoming was fantastic. Such a good joke, because not only is it funny, but it also is kind of meta. And I like that a lot. But there are a lot of after credit scenes that serve no purpose other than to tell a joke. And I'm not a huge fan of that. I think if you have nothing to add to the story, if you have nothing to add to the future, then it shouldn't be there in the first place. Even some of the after credit scenes that do add something are still annoying to me, because again, I know it's coming. I know you're going to set something else up. And I don't know. I kind of wish that only certain movies would have after credit scenes. Maybe you can still have those scenes, but you just put them at the end of the movie, right? So like the idea of Eternals having an after credit scene is weird to me, but maybe you could have just taken that scene and put it at the very end of the movie instead of making it this little part at the end of the credits. Maybe you can make it so that the only movies that have after credit scenes are the big movies, the movies that need to have them. Or maybe the only movies that have after credit scenes are the movies that need to set up something else really, really big. Everything else is just at the end of the movie. So I just think it's getting annoying how many times, I just think it's annoying that every movie has after credit scenes, and a lot of them are just jokes. The last thing that I hate about the MCU is just how much they use CGI. Don't get me wrong, it makes sense sometimes, because you can't just make a fully functioning robot that wants to take over the world, right? Ultron had to be CGI, and there's a lot of monsters that just don't exist, so you make them CGI. I'm not dumb, okay? That makes sense to me. But, and I think that the prequel trilogy from Star Wars had this problem too, especially The Phantom Menace. You almost become too reliant on CGI, and you end up using it in places where you don't even really need to. Now, like, landscapes are now CGI, and it gets kind of depressing. You know, like, I think there's a shot in The Falcon and the Winter Soldier where Bucky's in a forest. That forest isn't real. It's CGI. It's like, why? How hard is it to film on location? Like, I guess I guess it makes sense on a budget, because I suppose it is cheaper to film in a green room than to film in a forest where you have to locate all your stuff there. But it doesn't feel as magical, and it doesn't feel as interesting when everything you're doing is just in a studio. I like being able to watch the behind the scenes and go, oh, wow, they filmed that on location, and they were here. This was a real place. You know, when I watch behind the scenes and everything is green screen, I just get depressed. I'm like, this is lame. Like, you guys have become so dependent on green screen technology that you use it in places where you don't even need to. Remember in No Way Home, that shot of of Flash walking home with his like tennis gear or whatever? That background is all CGI. It's all green. There's nothing in that background that's real. And when Madam freaking Web has actual on-set locations in their movie, you know you've messed up when Madam Web does that, but the MCU doesn't. There's a lot of shots in Madam Web where they are actually in a city, and there's cars, people, lights, smoke, everything. It's all real. But in the MCU, in No Way Home, we have Flash walking through what is essentially a Gmod map. It looks awful. You're not really paying attention to it when you're watching the movie in the theater, but when you go home and you put the DVD in your player and you pause on these screens, you look at it and you go, it looks lifeless. There's nothing there. There's nothing interesting. There's no character to this. It's like you can almost see the green screen. And it's kind of depressing. It's just depressing to me how much green screen has replaced real life stuff. You don't need to be on location anymore. You don't need to build props anymore. You don't need to do anything because you can just green screen it. I just think that you need to use green screen when it's necessary, but green screen should not replace everything. Green screen shouldn't replace something just because it's convenient. Green screen should only do something when it's necessary. Not when it's convenient, it's when it's necessary, right? I remember when I was filming the trailer for my short film, Glitch Trapped, based on the Five Nights at Freddy's universe, which we're still working on and we're making great progress on, by the way. We shot part of that trailer with a green screen. It's the scene where I'm like standing there, I'm like waking up, I'm opening my eyes and I'm like breathing in. And the idea was that it was supposed to be a visual representation of me standing in the virtual reality world. And I liked the idea at the time, and I guess technically I still do. But I watched that trailer back. First of all, the green screen effect doesn't look that good. But even if it did look good, I just didn't like it. And like in retrospect, I was looking at it and I'm like, this just doesn't look good. The new script that I have for this short film that I'm making is going to utilize that, where we're going to film on location, but the locations that we're filming at are not meant to be the real world. They're meant to be the virtual reality world, because I just don't want to use green screen. So that is a comprehensive list of all the things that I hate about Marvel. We went over overusage of CGI. We went over the complaints of formulas. We went over misplacing humor. We went over a lot of things. And like I said before, I'm still a huge fan of Marvel. I love the MCU a lot. But as I get older, I'm starting to forget the MCU a little bit and go back and remind myself about all of the other things in Marvel that's good too. And this can go for DC as well. I haven't watched any of the DC animated universe movies, and I want to so badly because I've heard so many good things about them. And I often feel betrayed by the movies. You know, I often catch myself saying that, oh, the DC movies suck in comparison to Marvel. But then I stop myself and I think, well, wait a minute, that's not all DC has to offer. They have other things. They have comics, they have TV shows, they have video games, and some of those things are incredible, better than Marvel. I would argue that DC's animated series, animated stuff, is so much better than Marvel. And that's coming from a guy who hasn't watched any of them, right? So I'm excited to watch the movies in the animated universe and to maybe even watch some of the old DC shows. There's so many cartoons in the DC universe that I've completely neglected for the same reason why I've neglected Marvel, is because the movies, they've just become too popular. They've become the default for everybody. And I don't like that. The movies are not the default. I'm glad that people are enjoying them. I'm glad that people are watching them. And I'm glad that people are discovering Marvel and DC respectively through the movies. But you can't stop there. You can't just watch the movies and be like, all right, well, I'm good. You got to watch the really good stuff. You got to enjoy the good stuff. That's really all I have to say about that topic. So we're going to go into our devotional. Today, I'd like to talk about one of my favorite verses in the Bible. I actually don't need the Bible because I've committed it to memory. It's Matthew 6:26. Look at the birds in the air, for they do not reap, nor do they sow, nor do they gather into the barns. And yet your heavenly Father cares for them. Are you not of much more worth than they? Now that sounds a little bit more like some kind of poem, something weird. You're like, what the heck does that mean? Okay. God is basically, or not God, sorry, Jesus is essentially Jesus is putting focus on the birds, okay? So he's telling everyone, say, hey, look at the birds. Look up there. Look at those birds. And everyone looks up there. Okay. I'm looking at them. They do not reap, sow, nor gather into barns. What does that mean? Well, back in those days, before we mass-produced food in factories, we grew our food. And we still grow a lot of our food today because that's the only way you can get it. Unless you, process it, which is disgusting. Reaping means pulling the crops out of the ground, right? So taking all of the completely grown crops and reaping it, I think refers to like a scythe, right? It's because the scythe is you reap with a scythe, like wheat, for example. You're going to use a scythe to cut wheat and then you reap it. That's what reaping is. Reaping is taking all of the crops that are completely grown and pulling them out of the ground. Sowing refers to planting new seeds and new crops for the next season, right? So you take the ones that are already grown and then you sow the ones that you need to sow for next season. And gather into barns is simply storing, right? So storing your food and your crops. That's something that birds don't do. I don't know if you've ever noticed that. Birds don't save food for later. They find food to eat right now. And so he says, look at the birds in the air. They do not gather their food. They do not plant and make more food ready for later, and they don't store their food in mass amounts. And yet somehow they're still alive, and they've been alive for thousands of years because your Father cares for them. God cares for them. And if God cares for birds, then how much more do you think God cares about you? What I basically said is a way of rephrasing Matthew 6:26. Look at the birds of the air, for they do not reap, nor do they sow, nor do they gather into barns, and yet your heavenly Father cares for them. Are you not of much more worth than they? Are you not worth more than a bird? That's a serious question. Are you not worth more than a bird? Of course you are. God loves you so much. Of course he values you more than a bird. And if he cares for the birds of the air and provides for them every single day, then how much more do you think he's going to provide for you? Now, what is this saying? Is this saying that, we can just relax in our homes, never work a day of our lives, and never do anything else because God will provide for us? No, that's not what this is saying, okay? This verse isn't saying be lazy because God will hand you everything. What this verse is saying is don't worry. It's simple. It's not saying stop working. It's not saying stop providing. Continue to do that. But he's saying just stop worrying. Worrying is actually a sin. And if you didn't know that, that's true. To worry is to sin simply because to worry is to doubt God, right? To worry is to not have faith. So it's a sin. And that's something that we do all the time. Everyone does it. I do it. You do it. We all do it. We all worry. So, moral of the story, quit worrying and put more faith into God. Instead of worrying about passing that test, put your trust in God and say, you know what? I tried my best, and I know that God will choose the outcome that he wants. That's our devotional for today. So going off of that, that is our memory verse for this week. It's Matthew 6:26. It's not going to be very difficult for me because I already remembered it, but for all of you, memorize Matthew 6:26 for this week. Our prayer request for this week is very unique because there's not much that I'm allowed to say about it. It's one of those, okay? This is a person that I don't know super well. I'm friends with them online. And when I say online, I mean through Discord and through video games, right? This person I've talked to a little bit, and I've gotten to know them a little bit, and I'm happy to call them my friend. I don't know everything about them, though. In fact, I don't think I even know their real name. Because people on the internet go by pseudonyms. pseudonyms. They go by usernames, right? So, so this person, I don't know their real name. I only know them by their Discord username. And even that I'm not going to say, because I just don't want to single this person out. I don't want the relatives of this person to find this video and cause more trouble, right? So I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to give any information about who this person is or what their name is or really any extreme details. What I will say is the basics of what is going on and the basics of why they need prayer. They need prayer because they were recently severed off from their family. That's pretty much all I'm going to say about it. They were severed off from their family because of their actions, and because their actions are not in line with what their family believes in. And their family is religious. Christianity is about the least religious religion out there. It technically is a religion, but it doesn't really fall under the same categories that other religions do. Because a lot of what religion is the idea that that you follow a law or you follow a moral code in order to be righteous. Doesn't matter what religion you believe in. There are hundreds of religions that are all very different, but they all believe in this concept. They believe in this concept that you must follow some kind of rule, some kind of code, and if you do so, you are a righteous, holy person. And some even go farther by saying you have to worship this person, not this deity. You have to worship and obey this person, like the Pope or something, right? Some religions aren't terrible, but others are. I think that some of, at least from my knowledge, two of the worst religions in the Western side of the world, like America, is Jehovah's Witness and Mormonism. So I'm not entirely sure what denomination of Christianity this family is. They're not non-denominational, right? I'm non-denominational, and I have heard this person talk about their family, and I hear what they say, and I'm just like, that is really weird, or that's really bad. So obviously what I believe in is a completely different denomination than what this family does. I'm a non-denominational Christian. This family sounds a little bit more like Baptist, but I'm not entirely sure, so don't quote me on that. Needless to say, no matter what denomination they are weird. They're the kind of religious family that does weird things. And I hear some of the stories that this person has told me, and I'm just like, oh my goodness, I'm sorry. Like, not only am I sorry as a person, but I'm sorry as just a Christian, because the things that you are experiencing are not God. Like, you are experiencing a twisted view of God. Like, these people who are doing this to you are not acting on God's behalf. They are acting on a twisted version of God. And I'm sorry for that. Because now what's happening is you are being conditioned to hate God, even though you are not experiencing the real God. It's like, it's complicated, but it's sad. It really is sad that this person is now being pushed in a direction where they're going to try to be anti-God for the rest of their lives, simply because the way that certain people treated them. And this is not a new thing. This is something that happens all the time. People get turned off to the idea of God, not because of something that God did to them, but because of what other people did to them in the name of God. And this happens all the time. It's not a new concept. It's so old. It's been happening for so long. So my prayer today is that one day, I don't know when, maybe it'll be a week from now, maybe a year, maybe it'll be 20 years. I don't care when it happens. I just want it to happen eventually. I want this person to be able to experience the full and unadulterated love of Jesus Christ, the real Jesus Christ, not some twisted version where you have to follow a bunch of rules in order to be righteous, not this twisted version where you have to be a member at this church in order to be saved, not a version where you have to do all of these things and pay this money and attend church at this time and wear these clothes and be a part of these circles in order to be holy. Not that version. I want this person to experience the real love of God, of the God of the Bible, the real Bible, the real God who says, I don't care who you are. You can follow all the rules, and I still don't know who you are. So many people will come to me in their final days and say, look at all these things I did with you. We cast demons out in your name. We performed miracles in your name. We prayed in your name. And God says, I never knew you. That's in the Bible. I don't know what verse it is, but it's pretty popular. I'm sure you could find it. God says that there are going to be so many people that claim they did all these things with him, and God's going to say, I never knew you. I never knew who you were. That's because all of these people are following a twisted version of God. And so my prayer for today is, number one, I'm sorry to this person that they've experienced all of these things, all these horrible things in the name of God. And I'm sure that God is probably the last thing on their mind right now. I'm sure they don't want anything to do with him. They don't want anything. They don't want to be around him. They don't want people to tell him about him. And, that's fine. I get that. I've been there. I don't want to be that guy who pressures you into anything. I don't want to push you somewhere. So I'm not going to push anything on you. I'm going to let you take your life into your own hands, and I'm going to let you do you. But at the same time, I am going to pray for you in my own time. And I'm going to say, look, I'm sorry that you've had to experience these things. And I'm sorry that you've been turned off to the idea of Christ because of the horrible actions of the people around you who claim they are working on God's behalf. I'm sorry. My prayer is that one day God will reveal himself to you and you'll be able to see truly what God's character is really like. And you'll really be able to experience his love and his forgiveness. So that's my prayer. I can't tell you who this person is. I can't tell you their name. I'm not going to tell you their username. I'm not going to tell you the family. I'm not going to tell you any of this because I want to keep their situation private simply because I don't even know if I should be sharing this online. There's a very good chance that if I shared this online, I could be getting into some kind of trouble. And if this person found out that I was sharing it online, they may not like me anymore. And if they found out that I was praying for them, that might weird them out even more because of everything they've been through. So that's why I don't really want to give personal information because, like I said, I don't even know if I should be doing this. All I can say is I feel bad for them. I feel sorry for them. I feel emotions for them. And I want to do the right thing. And the only thing I can do is pray. So I just ask that all of you who are watching this video, pray for this person. You don't have to know their name. You don't have to know their exact situation. God will know who you're talking about. You just say, hey, you know what? Shane told me about this person. I don't know anything about them. But he told me enough. He told me that they're in a bad situation, and they told me that they came from a home that was very weirdly and obsessively religious, and that isn't you. And all I want is for them to feel the real love from you. Just pray that. That's all I ask. So that's our prayer request for this week. Anyway, that's going to do it for this episode. Thank you all so much for watching. If you did enjoy, please subscribe. I'm at 43 right now, I think. Might have hit 44? No, I think I'm at 43. So I'm 7 subscribers away from 50. And like I said in the last few episodes, once I get to 50, I'm going to do a special episode. I still don't know what I'm going to do. Actually, I have a fun idea. I might do it. But yes, please subscribe to my show. I only need 7 more, and then we'll do a special episode. If you have any prayer requests for yourself or for someone you know, if you have any questions for me, whether it be pop culture, maybe my opinions on Marvel, or spiritual and philosophical, if you have anything you want to say, let me know in the comments. I love reading comments, even from you, Brian, and I love hearing from people. And so far, I haven't received any prayer requests in the comments, but eventually when I do, I want to present those prayer requests on the show during that prayer request segment. So, and I just want to pray for you guys in general. So if you have anything you want to share, anything you want to add, anything you want to discuss with me, you want to debate with me, I'm so happy to hear it, and I'll reply, and I'll talk to you guys during it. Anyway, that's about all I have for you guys today. I hope you all have a wonderful week, and I'll see you all in the next episode. God bless.